So we're just, naturally, nonchalantly, just as we often do, just sitting in front of our building
Completely
in the hot
mic'd.
sun, just talking about a game.
Yeah.
I just beat The Last of Us.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Let's just get right into it. So for the entire game, you're playing as Joel escorting Ellie. It's a job, right? And you finally get her to her destination. And then the game switches because at one point you've done your job and they say, all right, Joel, take it easy. We got Ellie. We're going to go inside of her brain and get out a cure. And then it switches from being about this job to now you are playing Joel and he says, well, screw that. I like this little girl and I'm going to go and rescue her. And so suddenly, you are now Joel trying to win back the little girl that's become his lost daughter.
The significance of Ellie through the whole game is the fact that this sort of, I guess, paramilitary group that's trying to sort of help humanity survive called the Fireflies has identified her as somebody that's immune to this virus that's swept over humanity, decimated the population, turned a lot of people into these horrible clickers and runners, these kind of zombie-like creatures. She was bitten, and generally that takes hold in a couple days, and she's now lived many months with no effects. So they feel that she holds the cure to that humanity can be saved, or there could be a vaccine.
But then, of course, you find out that involves their idea for extracting this cure involves actually killing her. Yeah. One of the things you brought up, Tim, that I thought was interesting, you talk about who becomes his lost daughter.
Yeah.
Which one of the things I really liked about the game is the way they set that up in the intro with the first character you control is, what's her name, Sarah?
Yeah.
Is Joel's daughter.
Yeah.
And she gets killed during the initial zombie outbreak. I guess what I really liked is after that initial sequence, players are then there with Joel when that happened. Yeah. They know what that's about. They know that sort of ruined him. The game is not weighted down with a lot of monologues about how, oh, I miss my daughter.
Right.
Oh, this little girl might replace the love that I lost.
There's no exposition. He never wants to talk about it.
He doesn't talk about it at all. So I just love how you get that one little sequence at the beginning that sets it up. It's obvious that Ellie is sort of filling this space, but the game does not bend over itself trying to hammer that point home.
I think in general they do a good job of just giving it a lot of space. I mean, they don't feel the need to sort of, I guess, hit you over the head with exposition all the time. A lot of the relationships built with just dialogue in between the sort of intense combat sections. I like the pacing of the game a lot. I think that too few games really allow you to really sort of take in the environment that well, and you really get the sense of what it would be like to wander about the sort of abandoned ruins of what used to be civilization. And I think as you move later in the game into more of the wilderness areas, and there's a whole sequence with the kind of stronghold at the dam, that kind of hydroelectric dam and thing. I think it's just really a beautiful game, and I like the fact that they, in terms of the dialogue, storytelling, and just pacing, that they give it time to breathe. You know what I mean? They don't feel the need to rush between cutscenes or rush between.
One thing I did like is the fact that they're willing to make jumps between seasons and stuff, and
I really
they'll flash
like that.
forward where it's just when Joel falls on the rebar and gets hurt, it flashes forward. He falls off the horse, and then flash forward to Ellie taking care of him, and it's not clear whether Joel's dead or not.
Oh, and I love the way they sort of tease that out for as long as they can.
That was great. And then she's looking for medicine, and that's you're playing for 20 minutes, a half hour, and then you realize that she's talking to this other survivor, and she needs medicine. Well, obviously this is for Joel, and they did a really good job with that. And I honestly thought that Joel was going to die at that point, and I was ready for the game to end that way. I'm really happy that they didn't.
People kind of throw the word cinematic around a lot, just for any game that has a lot of cutscenes, and Metal Gear. I don't really think Metal Gear is very cinematic, to be honest, because I don't think he uses a lot of the techniques that filmmakers use to tell story. I think it's very much Metal Gear style.
It has a lot of cinematics.
Yeah, it has cinematics in terms of, yes, there's videos and cutscenes, but that kind of change of season and allowing time to pass, and then bringing it back with a sort of a title matte screen where it says fall or winter or spring. That's actually very explicitly a film technique that it isn't really used in games very much, or I can't remember one that has a lot of that, where you sort of dip, you come out of the story for a while and time has elapsed and you come back.
One thing I was thinking of too, you play any other game pretty much, and it's just you never cut away from this character until the very end. And they were willing to not only switch around seasons, but also switch, perspectives, where you get a different sense of the world, and you kind of understand where it's just as when you're playing as Joel, it's okay, well, Ellie's following me around, I gotta wait for her to catch up, she's not that capable all the time. Then you're playing as Ellie, and you kind of get this different perspective where it's like, Joel's sort of a dick sometimes, and like, he's...
I liked how when you're controlling Ellie, her melee attack, like she has that little knife
my
with
God,
her all
it's
the
so
time,
good.
which is cool, but it really kind of drives home the fact about how Joel, like when he goes in for those like close melee kills, he's using his hands most of the time on that stuff.
And he's just bigger and more powerful, and in general the game, I never feel like you feel like you've really mastered combat. I never felt very comfortable. I mean, and not in a bad way that it was poor mechanics, but just you're meant to, if you survive it, that's fine. It's not about like elegantly picking your way and doing awesome, Sam Fisher stealth kills, hanging down, and you know, it's just like it's going to be a mess. It always seems to break down.
Another thing that I love about the way that sort of conveyed with Joel is that like if you think about like other video games, take Uncharted, like Nathan Drake, in the course of an adventure, brutally murders hundreds of people. No one flinches because like, hey, it's a video game. So if you approach Last of Us kind of like that, where it's like, okay, I mean, like I'm killing a bunch of dudes with my bare hands, but like, it's a video game. That's what you do. And then I really like there's a moment where you run across these other survivors who've captured Ellie, and they talk about how like someone said that our scouting party was just slaughtered by a lunatic.
Yeah.
And that sort of makes you look at it in a little of a different way. And that like, I mean, like in this world, Joel is kind of crazy and unnecessarily brutal.
Yeah, it's either you say hello with a gunshot or not, and that's what separates how things are going to go down.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about that? In a game where there's not like a real clear antagonist, that David character that sort of is hunting after Ellie in the flaming building. Like, what do you guys think of that whole situation?
I thought it was effective. I mean, the resolution of that where Ellie violently murders him was pretty disturbing and probably showed like how far she had been sort of bent, I guess, by the world, which seemed to be what they were trying to illustrate.
Yeah.
As far as Joel, I mean, I guess we should probably address the last moment of the game.
Yeah, let's talk about that. It's got him talking to Marlene in the garage of the hospital, and she's telling him like, hey, come on back with us, like this is the right thing to do, and it flashes forward to him like presumably thinking about driving away with Ellie, and it flashes back, and then suddenly you realize that Joel shoots Marlene and lies to Ellie about there being other people that are immune and they don't need to worry about it anymore. And then it leads to a point where Ellie lays it all on the line, says that she was ready to die when her friend Riley died.
Yeah.
And she's kind of been waiting for that moment to come, and also Ellie wants to help in any way she can. If it means sacrifice, then fine. And she asks Joel to swear that, everything he said was true. And he pauses for a minute. That's another thing that the game does great, is they chew on scenes for a minute. And he pauses and says he swears, and then she kind of pauses, looks around, and she says, okay.
And they keep walking.
And it seems pretty clear that Ellie, or at least to me, that she knows that Joel's lying.
I think she maybe suspects. She wouldn't ask him otherwise.
No.
Obviously.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinarily kind of brutal, ending in a lot of ways, because Reiner kind of described it as the end of Usual Suspects, not in the same way, but all of a sudden if you start to look back at the game through the lens of everything you were doing maybe wasn't right, like Joel kind of seems sort of like a homicidal maniac if you looked at him in a certain way.
Yeah.
And he's basically doomed humanity to extinction to save a girl that he was sort of had these misguided like paternal feelings about, who number one also didn't even want to be saved to begin with.
Right.
So he's really, it's in most games at the end you feel sort of a sense of triumph, and it sort of ends at this like super ambivalent.
Couldn't have been more fitting for that game.
It's not a violent or a really big moment, but it's sort of emotionally draining because, it turns out the entire game you've been completely misguided, and all this violence and all the things that you did were literally for nothing, and actually were the opposite of what you should have done. Not only probably morally for the greater good of humanity, but also for the particular girl who didn't want or need you to save her in the beginning.
You may have murdered like the last known brain surgeon also in the world, who knows?
I shot him in the leg.
You did? Oh, that's nice. I know if you go up and you can take his scalpel and stab him in the neck with his scalpel. Yeah.
See, I shot one of the people in the operating room, like just by instinct, and then one of the ladies actually says, "You're a monster" or something, which was kind of the first like hint of where they were going with it, but I didn't really think about it until it was over.
Come on, baby girl. I got you. I got you.
I don't know even still how I feel about the ending. I mean, it's certainly one of the better
I like how you put it in your review, Matt, where you just said, like, there are no easy answers. And in fact, actually going back a little bit, that's one of the things that I found a little disappointing to that David encounter that Tim was talking about. They do a pretty good job of just like painting the other survivors in that group as being sort of just like subhuman animals. It's heavily implied that like David had attempted to rape Ellie and that they're cannibals. And you know, and so it's like when you compare that with a show like The Walking Dead, for instance, or the comic, they do a better job of like the ambiguity of like when a survivor meets another survivor in this world, it's not necessarily a case of good versus evil or evil versus evil.
It definitely seemed like David and those hunters were.
Yeah, they were just bad guys. And
you're right. That's probably the only time they verge over into, let's say, like video gamey kind of comic booky like villainy, I guess.
But I mean, otherwise I feel like it's the way the game handles just the emotional side of Joel and Ellie is handled pretty deftly throughout.
It's probably one of the more like convincing video game stories I think I've ever played.
And the voice acting of the two main characters, the voice actors do a tremendous,
fantastic.
I think about as good of a job of voice acting I think has ever been done in the history of games. The performances are very real and not overdone.
And speaking of like resolution, I know that Naughty Dog, they're not really interested in doing a sequel, at least to this story. So I'm so fine with that.
As much as I love the game and I gave it a 9.5, and I think it's one of the best games of the year, and I think it could totally be in the running for Game of the Year. I think it probably will be for many, many people. I really don't want them to do a sequel.
No.
I mean, because I feel like what made the game so powerful for me was the sort of like ambivalent, almost bitter kind of ending. And I think to continue the story and not leave it that kind of open-ended question would almost diminish the ending to me in a certain way. And I don't know, it's a great game and I loved it, but I don't necessarily think everything needs to be a franchise all the time.
Yeah, well, I've heard that was one of the things that surprised me when the game came out. One of the complaints from the people who were complaining about the ending, they were kind of like, oh, they just left the door open for a sequel. Theoretically, because both characters are still alive, you could make a sequel to it. But like, I didn't feel that was a sequel tease at all.
I'm not going to try to make guesses about the audience, but I think that for video games, like, nothing's really handled a story this maturely, at least from what I've seen, and taken as much of a risk with an ending. And there's that kind of ending and that sort of ambiguity exists in the games based off The Road. The Road has, that sort of ambiguity, and other movies, and it's new, so I think people are trying to take their thoughts about this weird kind of story and slot it into what they know about games.
It's a great ending, and it's great because it's open-ended, because you really don't know, as we said, does Ellie believe him? How does she feel about Joel at the end? How does Joel feel about what he did? It would be so much worse to like end on this like, I can't believe you did that, Joel, and you betrayed humanity and stuff.
Yeah.
It would have been more corny. Now it's like you're leaving the question open to the audience of like, who was right, who was wrong? Were you doing the right thing through this whole process, this whole 15 hours that you just spent? The ultimate question is that, if you put it in the kind of classic video game black and white terms, like, it might be the first game where you could argue that you played as the villain of the story, depending on how you interpret the events, and
It's definitely not a classic hero.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing I have to give them credit for, just in general, the way they handle the game is zombie fiction is super popular, and there's so many iterations of it out there that if you look at this game and just think, well, it's a zombie video game, you couldn't be more wrong.
Right.
It just kind of uses the zombies as an excuse to create a world that generates these sort of like emotional situations that they're looking at, rather than making it about an outbreak or something. Right. That's another thing that I loved about it, by the way, is the fact that like the outbreak happens at the beginning and then it fast forwards 20 years later.
Yeah, and you never see any of it.
Yeah, you don't deal with like how does civilization reconstruct itself afterwards and stuff, like, whereas like a lot of zombie fiction has like oh, that building over there looks like it used to, but except it's abandoned and it's eerie. And now it's like that building over there has been almost completely reclaimed by nature, has grass and trees and stuff growing in it because like no one's lived in it or touched it for 20 years.
Yeah. What else I loved about that too is like we didn't know any more about the cordyceps virus from when we first did the cover story to playing the game. All we knew is that Ellie was immune. Other than that, we just they don't even talk about it. The only time they ever talk about it is just like, when he realizes that they need Ellie for the cure, and they're like, wait, but that's in the brain. Like that's the only time they ever even really talk about it. And
Yeah.
I love that because no
one would know. I mean, and, if that really happened, an average person wouldn't have any idea about it. They don't get bogged down in all like, I know you love
T-virus.
but
No,
that
that's
whole
right.
like T-virus.
There's two parts. There's the
ridiculous.
Romero style where they're just like, there's an outbreak. We're not going to talk about it. Like people have to deal with it now. And
There are
then there's-
zombies now.
Yeah, and then there's Raccoon City where it's just like we're going to look under the microscope and figure out how this thing was, and it was synthesized. And I'm as much as I like Resident Evil for all its camp, I prefer the ambiguity of it all, and I think that Last of Us nailed that. And you know what? Maybe this is getting too geeky, but there's a chance. I mean, yeah. So Joel may have doomed some people from a cure, but if Ellie lived on to like have children, isn't there a chance that immunity could spread that way?
Her children would be
Yeah.
immune, perhaps. Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but that's what I think's great about the ending. The reason that I feel that I didn't know people were complaining about the ending. That's
No, I
interesting.
mean, like, it's not like Mass Effect. There's no one who's
Right.
like,
Right.
hey, give us back our Last of Us ending.
Sure.
But it's more about,
It's a misunderstanding, I think.
yeah, I mean, like in the same way that like people complained about BioShock Infinite's ending.
People
like-
complain about
like-
everything.
Yeah. Anyone who plays anything there's going to be a contingent of people who don't like part of it.
Video games. It's fun.
Sorry.
It's amazing.
Yeah, really good
It's an
game.
amazing
So
game.
hopefully enough people check that out. And
Yeah, I hope it
I'm
does
assuming
well.
it's going to be very, very near the top of a lot of people's Game of the Year lists. And
Absolutely.
probably rightfully so.
Absolutely.